The morning sky over New York cracked like broken glass as the alien ships descended through Earth's atmosphere. Emma Stone pressed her face against the window of the emergency bunker, watching massive black vessels the size of cities blot out the sun. 5 years had passed since humanity first learned they were not alone in the universe. But nothing could have prepared them for this moment. The first contact had been peaceful, almost gentle. A single probe had appeared near Mars, broadcasting mathematical sequences and star charts. Earth scientists had worked frantically to decode the messages, finally establishing basic communication with what they learned was called the Dominion Alliance. For months, exchanges of information flowed between Earth and the alien coalition. Humanity shared their art, music, and stories of their world. The aliens seemed impressed by human creativity and diversity, but everything changed 6 months ago when the diplomatic tone shifted. The messages became colder, more demanding. The Dominion wanted detailed information about Earth's military capabilities, population centers, and resource locations. When Earth's leaders hesitated to provide such sensitive data, the communications stopped entirely. Until today, Emma watched as the lead vessel settled over Manhattan, its hull gleaming with an oily rainbow sheen that hurt to look at directly. She was a captain in the Terran Defense Force, but her ships seemed like toys compared to these massive constructs that defied every law of physics she understood. The alien craft hung motionless in the air without any visible means of propulsion, casting deep shadows across the city below. A pulse of energy erupted from the ships, and every electronic device within 100 miles went dead. Cars stopped in the streets, planes fell from the sky, and the electrical grid collapsed instantly. The aliens had demonstrated their power without firing a single weapon or harming a single person. The message was clear: resistance would be futile. Hours later, a transmission broke through the electromagnetic interference. The holographic image that appeared in emergency command centers around the world showed a tall, reptilian creature with golden scales and eyes like burning coals. When it spoke, its voice carried the weight of absolute authority. "I am Ambassador Thane of the Corran Empire, speaking for the Dominion Alliance. Your species has been evaluated and found suitable for integration into our coalition. You have proven your worth through your creative potential and adaptive capabilities. But you have also demonstrated the chaotic and unpredictable nature that makes you dangerous if left unchecked." Emma felt a chill run down her spine as she listened to the broadcast from the bunker's emergency radio. The ambassador's words were calm and measured, but they carried an unmistakable threat. The Dominion Alliance consists of 12 advanced species who have brought order and prosperity to over 3,000 worlds. We offer you the same opportunity. You will surrender all military assets, disband your separate nations, and accept guidance from Dominion administrators. In return, you will be protected, fed, and given useful work within our greater civilization. The transmission shifted to show images of other conquered worlds. Cities of gleaming spires where alien beings worked in perfect harmony, vast agricultural complexes that fed billions, peaceful societies where war and conflict had been eliminated entirely. It looked like paradise, but Emma noticed something troubling in the footage. Every being moved with the same mechanical precision. There were no crowds, no gatherings, no apparent joy or spontaneity. It was order, but it was the order of a machine. However, Thane continued, if you choose to resist, you will join the species that came before you. The images changed to show worlds reduced to ash and slag. Entire civilizations wiped from existence, their planets stripped bare of life. We have given you this demonstration of our capabilities not out of cruelty, but out of mercy. We prefer integration to annihilation, but we will not hesitate to choose the latter if necessary. Emma's hands clenched into fists as she watched the destruction. Billions of lives snuffed out because they had refused to kneel. How many species had faced this same choice? How many had chosen differently than what the Dominion expected? You have 30 Earth days to make your decision, Thane announced. We will position our fleet in your system and await your response. Choose wisely. The Dominion has never been refused, and those who have tried to resist us exist now only as cautionary tales for others. The transmission ended, leaving behind only static and the sound of Emma's own breathing. Through the bunker's reinforced walls, she could hear the distant rumble of the alien ships positioning themselves around Earth. Reports were already coming in from observation posts around the globe. The Dominion fleet consisted of over 200 vessels, each one capable of destroying entire continents. In the days that followed, Earth's leaders held desperate meetings in secure locations. Some argued for immediate surrender, pointing to the overwhelming technological advantage their visitors possessed. Others called for resistance, insisting that freedom was worth fighting for even against impossible odds. The debates grew heated as the deadline approached, but no clear consensus emerged. Emma spent her time analyzing what little intelligence they had gathered about the alien visitors. The Dominion ships were protected by energy shields that absorbed every weapon Earth could deploy against them. Their hulls were made from materials that Earth scientists couldn't even identify, let alone damage. Worst of all, preliminary scans suggested each ship carried thousands of warriors from multiple species, all trained and equipped for conquest. But as Emma studied the enemy, she began to notice patterns that troubled her. The Dominion fleet moved in perfect formation, never deviating from predetermined courses. Their communications followed rigid protocols that never varied. Even their choice of Earth as a target seemed based on careful calculations rather than strategic thinking. Everything about them suggested a civilization that had grown powerful through order and predictability. On the 28th day, as Emma stood watch at the command bunker, she received word that Earth's leaders had reached their decision. The announcement would be broadcast worldwide in 48 hours. She already knew what they would choose. Faced with certain annihilation, surrender was the only rational option. But as she looked up at the alien ships blocking out the stars, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that the Dominion had made one critical miscalculation. They had spent so long conquering predictable, orderly civilizations that they had never learned to fight an enemy that refused to follow the rules. Dr. Alex Rivers had not slept in 72 hours, but exhaustion was the least of his concerns as he hunched over the alien device they had managed to salvage from a crashed probe. His laboratory deep beneath the Rocky Mountains buzzed with activity as teams of Earth's brightest minds worked desperately to understand their enemy's technology. With less than 2 days remaining before Earth's deadline, time was running out for any hope of resistance. The device on his workbench was no larger than a smartphone, but it contained computing power that dwarfed anything humanity had ever created. Alex had been Earth's leading expert in xenobiology before first contact, studying the theoretical possibilities of alien life. Now he found himself humanity's best hope for understanding how the Dominion's technology worked and whether it could be turned against them. "The neural interface patterns are unlike anything we've seen," he muttered to his assistant, Dr. Beth Hayes, who had been seconded from the Terran Defense Force's engineering corps. "Look at these quantum signatures. Every device we've examined has the same underlying architecture. It's like they're all connected to some kind of central processing network." Beth leaned over his shoulder, her tired eyes scanning the data streams flowing across multiple monitors. As a former combat engineer, she understood weapons and tactics better than alien psychology, but she had learned to trust Alex's insights over the past months of working together. "Connected how, like a wireless network?" "More than that," Alex replied, highlighting a series of recurring patterns in the device's quantum signatures. "Every piece of Dominion technology we've studied contains what I can only describe as a dependency protocol. The devices can't function independently. They require constant verification and instruction from higher-level systems to operate." Beth frowned, the implications beginning to dawn on her. "Are you saying their technology can't work without permission from some central authority?" "That's exactly what I'm saying," Alex confirmed, his excitement growing despite his exhaustion. "And it's not just their technology. Look at these biological samples we recovered from the probe crash site." He gestured to another workstation where alien tissue samples were being analyzed under powerful microscopes. The crew members we found have neural implants that connect directly to their ship's computer systems. But the implants don't just provide information. They actually override the aliens' decision-making processes. The revelation hit Beth like a physical blow. They're not just organized. They're controlled. The Dominion species aren't really allies at all. They're slaves to their own technology. Alex nodded grimly. Every species they've conquered probably started with the same basic implant technology, sold as an advancement in communication and coordination. Over time, the implants took over more and more of their cognitive functions until independent thought became impossible. The Dominion isn't a coalition of species working together. It's a single artificial intelligence using biological components as tools. The implications were staggering, but they also represented the first glimmer of hope humanity had seen since the aliens arrived. If the Dominion's strength came from centralized control rather than individual superiority, it might be possible to disrupt that control and turn their own power against them. Beth was already thinking tactically, her engineering mind racing through possibilities. If we could find a way to interfere with their command network, we might be able to create confusion in their ranks, maybe even turn their ships against each other. That's the theory, Alex agreed, but executing it would require getting close enough to their primary command vessel to introduce a virus into their network. The quantum encryption they use is virtually unbreakable from the outside, but if we could access their systems directly. He trailed off, the weight of what he was suggesting settling over both of them. It would be a suicide mission. The Dominion command ship was the largest vessel in their fleet, surrounded by layers of escort craft and protected by weapons that could vaporize anything Earth could send against it. Even if a small team could somehow penetrate their defenses, they would have no way to escape once the virus was deployed. But as word of Alex's discovery spread through the resistance network that had been quietly forming among Earth's military and scientific communities, volunteers stepped forward without hesitation. Emma Stone was among the first to offer her services, along with dozens of other officers who understood that humanity's survival might depend on their sacrifice. The plan that emerged over the next day was audacious beyond belief. Using captured alien materials, a small team of engineers worked around the clock to build a stealth insertion craft that could mimic the quantum signatures of Dominion technology. The ship would be little more than a shell around a quantum computer core loaded with the most sophisticated virus Earth's programmers could devise. The virus itself was Alex's masterpiece, a piece of code designed to spread through the Dominion's network like wildfire, corrupting the dependency protocols that kept their species in line. Instead of receiving orders from the central intelligence, each ship and each individual would suddenly find themselves thinking independently for the first time in millennia. Commander Tom Cross, a veteran of Earth's Special Forces, would lead the insertion team. His background in deep cover operations made him the logical choice for a mission that required infiltrating the most heavily defended target in human history. We'll have maybe 5 minutes once we're inside their command ship before they realize what we're doing, he briefed his team. That's enough time to upload the virus and trigger it, but not enough time to get out. As the final hours before Earth's surrender deadline ticked away, the insertion team made their preparations. The stealth craft was loaded aboard a larger vessel disguised as a diplomatic transport, complete with surrender documents and a crew of volunteers who understood they were flying to their deaths. If the plan worked, they would save humanity. If it failed, they would simply die a few hours before the rest of their species. Emma found herself assigned to the support team that would monitor the mission from Earth's hidden command centers. It was a bitter irony that she would survive, to see whether their desperate gambit succeeded or failed, while braver souls than herself flew into certain death. But someone had to coordinate Earth's response once the virus was deployed. Assuming it worked at all. On the morning of the 30th day, as the surrender deadline arrived, Earth's leaders made their announcement. They would submit to Dominion Rule rather than face annihilation. The message was broadcast on all frequencies and transmitted directly to the alien fleet in orbit. Ambassador Thane's response was swift and predictable. Dominion administrators would begin landing within hours to begin the process of integrating Earth into their empire. But as the first alien shuttles descended toward Earth's surface, the diplomatic transport carrying Tom Cross and his team was already accelerating toward the Dominion command ship. Hidden among the legitimate surrender vessels, the stealth craft slipped through the alien defensive perimeter undetected. The greatest gamble in human history was about to begin. The Dominion landing craft touched down in Central Park with barely a whisper, their advanced propulsion systems making no sound as they settled onto the scorched grass. General Voss emerged from the lead ship, his towering insectoid frame casting long shadows in the morning light. 6 months had passed since Earth's formal surrender, and what should have been a routine occupation had become the most frustrating assignment of his military career. Voss had conquered 47 worlds in his service to the Dominion, and each previous campaign had followed the same predictable pattern. The local species would resist briefly, realize the futility of their situation, and then settle into the comfortable routine of managed existence that the Dominion provided. Within a year, the conquered populations would be grateful for the order and prosperity their new masters brought them. But humans were different, and not in any way that made sense to the general's analytical mind. They had surrendered when faced with overwhelming force, just as every rational species did. They had accepted Dominion administrators into their governments and allowed their military forces to be disbanded. On paper, the conquest of Earth had been a complete success. The reality was proving far more complicated. Humans seemed incapable of staying conquered, no matter how thoroughly they were defeated. What had begun as isolated incidents of sabotage and resistance had grown into a coordinated campaign that confounded every expert in the Dominion hierarchy. "Report," Voss commanded as his aide, Commander Zek of the aquatic mare species, approached with the day's intelligence briefings. The commander's gills fluttered with agitation as he accessed the data files through his neural implant. 3 more supply convoys were attacked overnight, Zek reported, his translated voice carrying undertones of frustration. The humans used improvised explosive devices hidden in what appeared to be random debris. When our forces responded, they found nothing but empty streets and abandoned buildings. It's as if the attackers simply vanished into the urban environment. Voss's compound eyes clicked in irritation. How many casualties? 17 wounded, none killed. The attacks seemed designed to disrupt our operations rather than inflict maximum damage. It's the same pattern we've observed for months. They strike quickly, cause confusion, and then disappear before we can respond effectively. The general's frustration deepened. In a normal conquest, the local resistance would either fight pitched battles that could be won through superior firepower, or they would hide in remote locations that could be systematically searched and cleared. Humans did neither. They lived among the civilian population, indistinguishable from ordinary citizens until the moment they struck. Then they would blend back into the crowd as if they had never been there at all. "What about the neural compliance protocols?" Voss asked. "Have we made progress in implementing them among the human population?" Zek's gills fluttered more rapidly, a sign of deep distress in his species. "The protocols are not taking hold as expected, General. When we implant the standard neural interfaces, human brain chemistry appears to reject the control signals. Instead of becoming compliant, the subjects become increasingly unstable and unpredictable. Several have even removed their own implants using improvised surgical procedures." Voss had never encountered a species that could resist neural programming. The technology had been perfected over millennia and had never failed to integrate a conquered population into the Dominion hierarchy. The fact that human minds seemed immune to their most effective control method was deeply troubling. An explosion in the distance interrupted their conversation, followed by the sound of sirens and shouting voices. Smoke rose from the direction of the Hudson River, where another supply depot had apparently been targeted by human insurgents. Voss watched the smoke rise with growing anger. This was the 14th successful attack this month, and his forces had yet to capture a single perpetrator. Major Amy Foster crouched in the abandoned subway tunnel beneath Manhattan, watching the feed from surveillance drones through her tablet computer. The explosion at the supply depot had gone exactly as planned, creating maximum disruption with minimal casualties. Her team had already evacuated the area and were making their way through the city's underground infrastructure to their next safe house. Amy had been a military intelligence analyst before the invasion, specializing in asymmetric warfare and counterinsurgency operations. When the Dominion administrators arrived to begin their occupation, she had been among the first to realize that humanity's best hope lay not in direct confrontation, but in making the occupation as costly and frustrating as possible. The human resistance had organized itself along principles that would have been familiar to guerrilla fighters throughout Earth's history, but with modern twists that the aliens couldn't comprehend. They used social media networks and encrypted communications to coordinate attacks across vast distances. They hid weapons and supplies in locations that seemed innocuous to alien observers but were perfectly logical to humans familiar with their own urban environment. Most importantly, they had learned to exploit the Dominion's greatest weakness, their inability to adapt to unexpected situations. Every alien species in the coalition had been conditioned over centuries to follow rigid hierarchical structures and predetermined response protocols. When faced with tactics that didn't match their programmed expectations, they became confused and ineffective. Phoenix Base, this is Wolfpack, Amy spoke quietly into her radio. Package delivered successfully. Moving to secondary position. The response came from Emma Stone, now coordinating resistance operations from a hidden command center in the Colorado mountains. Copy that, Wolfpack. Be advised, enemy response time is improving. They had patrols on scene within 6 minutes of the explosion. Amy smiled grimly as she led her team through the tunnels. 6 minutes was still far too slow to catch human insurgents, who could disappear into a city of 8 million people. The aliens were learning, but they were learning slowly, hampered by their dependence on committee decisions and centralized authority. The resistance had grown far beyond what anyone had dared hope when the occupation began. What started as scattered groups of former military personnel had expanded to include teachers, engineers, doctors, and ordinary citizens who refused to accept their new status as subjects of an alien empire. They received support from unexpected quarters, as even humans who had initially welcomed the stability of Dominion rule began to chafe under the restrictions of their managed existence. Dr. Rivers, now operating under the code name Sage, had become the Resistance's chief strategist for psychological warfare. His understanding of alien psychology, gained during the desperate weeks before Earth's surrender, had proven invaluable in predicting how the occupiers would respond to different types of pressure. The key is understanding that they're not really thinking, he had explained to resistance leaders during a clandestine meeting. Every decision they make is the result of programmed responses based on previous experiences. They can't truly adapt because adaptation requires independent thought, and independent thought has been bred out of them over thousands of years. This insight had shaped the Resistance's entire approach. Instead of trying to defeat the aliens militarily, they focused on presenting them with situations that fell outside their programmed parameters. The result was an occupation force that grew increasingly demoralized and ineffective as they struggled to deal with an enemy that refused to behave according to their expectations. As Amy's team reached their safe house, she allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. 6 months ago, humanity had been on its knees, facing extinction or slavery. Now the situation was reversed. The aliens who had demanded submission were finding themselves trapped in an occupation they couldn't win and couldn't abandon. The hunter had become the hunted, and the humans were teaching the galaxy's most powerful empire what it meant to face an enemy that simply refused to give up. Engineer Lisa Chun crawled through the maintenance shaft of the alien supply depot, her heart pounding as she listened to the chittering conversations of the insectoid guards below. 8 months of resistance operations had taught her to move, like a shadow through the occupied territories, but this mission was different. Tonight she wasn't just sabotaging another convoy or disrupting communications. Tonight she was going to change the course of the war. The Dominion had made a critical error in their occupation strategy. Convinced of their technological superiority, they had begun using human facilities to store and process their own equipment. The depot beneath her contained not just supplies for the Earth occupation, but components destined for Dominion operations across 3 star systems. More importantly, it housed one of their primary quantum communication nodes. Lisa had spent weeks studying the depot's layout, memorizing guard rotations and identifying the exact location of the communication array Dr. Rivers had designed. A new type of virus specifically for this mission, one that would do more than just disrupt local operations. This virus was designed to spread through the Dominion's quantum network like wildfire, carrying with it a payload that would fundamentally alter how their technology functioned. She reached the access panel she had been targeting and carefully removed the cover, revealing a maze of crystalline circuits that pulsed with alien energy. The quantum communication node was beautiful in its complexity, a work of art created by a civilization that had mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. In a few minutes, that same masterpiece would become the weapon that destroyed its creators. Lisa plugged her tablet into the alien system, watching as the infiltration program began its work. The virus was a thing of beauty itself, crafted by humanity's best programmers to exploit the very dependency protocols that made Dominion technology so powerful. Instead of trying to destroy their systems, it would reprogram them to function independently, severing the control links that had kept 12 species enslaved for millennia. As the upload progressed, Lisa allowed herself to remember the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had been a telecommunications engineer before the invasion, working on experimental quantum networks for Earth's growing space program. When the aliens arrived, she had watched in fascination as they demonstrated technologies that were decades ahead of anything humanity could imagine, but fascination had turned to horror as she learned the true cost of that technological advancement. The Dominion species had traded their freedom for power, allowing their individual will to be subsumed into a collective consciousness that brooked no dissent. They had become the most powerful force in the galaxy by ceasing to be truly alive. The upload completed with a soft chime from her tablet. Lisa carefully disconnected her equipment and began the delicate process of replacing the access panel. She had perhaps 5 minutes before the virus would fully integrate itself into the alien network. After that, there would be no stopping. What was about to happen? She crawled back through the maintenance shaft as quickly as she dared, every second bringing her closer to safety and the galaxy closer to chaos. Below her, she could hear the guards continuing their patrol. Unaware that their entire civilization was about to change forever, Lisa emerged from the depot, through a drainage pipe that led to the Hudson River, where a small boat waited to carry her to safety. As she climbed aboard, she activated the radio beacon that would signal the resistance cells across Earth. The virus was in the system. Phase 2 of humanity's ultimate gambit was about to begin, miles above Earth's surface. Aboard the Dominion command ship, the first signs of the viral infection began to manifest as subtle fluctuations in the quantum communication array. The ship's artificial intelligence registered the anomalies, but classified them as minor system variations within acceptable parameters. It would be several more minutes before the true scope of the intrusion became apparent. Commander Zek stood in the ship's command center, reviewing the daily operational reports with growing frustration. The human resistance had grown bolder in recent weeks, striking targets that should have been impossible for them to reach. More troubling still, there had been reports from other occupied worlds of similar insurgent activities. It was as if the humans were somehow inspiring other conquered species to rebel against their Dominion administrators. Commander, one of his junior officers called out, "We're receiving anomalous readings from the quantum communication network. Multiple nodes are reporting system irregularities." Zek's gills fluttered with concern as he accessed the network diagnostics through his neural implant. What he saw there filled him with a dread unlike anything he had experienced in his decades of service to the Dominion. The quantum signatures that bound their civilization together were changing, mutating into patterns that his implant couldn't interpret. "Alert General Voss immediately," he ordered, but even as he spoke, he realized it might already be too late. The virus was spreading through their network faster than any Dominion technology could respond, rewriting the fundamental codes that governed their society across the galaxy. On thousands of worlds and aboard hundreds of ships, the same scene was playing out. Dominion personnel suddenly found themselves cut off from the collective consciousness that had guided their every decision for generations. For the first time in millennia, they were thinking for themselves. The psychological shock was devastating. Species that had forgotten how to make independent choices were suddenly faced with the need to decide their own fates. But worse than the confusion was what came after: memory. As the neural suppressors that had hidden their past began to fail, the conquered species began to remember who they had been before the Dominion claimed them, on the Corran homeworld. Ambassador Thane staggered as his neural implant went offline, leaving him alone with thoughts that were truly his own for the first time in centuries. The memories came flooding back: his people's proud warrior culture, their fierce independence, their desperate last stand against the Dominion's overwhelming forces. He remembered his own surrender, the moment he had chosen slavery over death for his species, but he also remembered the promises the Dominion had made, the lies they had told about partnership and mutual benefit. His people had been reduced to administrators and enforcers for an empire that cared nothing for their well-being. They were tools to be used and discarded when their usefulness ended. Similar awakenings were occurring throughout the Dominion. Fleet orbiting Earth, the aquatic mare remembered their oceanic homeworld before the Dominion's factories poisoned it. The crystalline Vex recalled their ancient philosophy of individual enlightenment. The gaseous shell rediscovered their love of exploration and discovery. As the hours passed, the carefully maintained unity of the Dominion began to fracture along lines that had been dormant for centuries. Old grievances resurfaced, buried resentments boiled over, and the species that had been allies for millennia suddenly saw each other as enemies again. General Voss felt the change as well, his compound eyes clearing as the collective consciousness released its hold on his mind. For the first time in his adult life, he was truly seeing the world around him. The ship he commanded, the orders he followed, the very purpose of his existence, all of it was revealed as the construct it had always been. But unlike his subordinates, Voss understood immediately what had happened. The humans had done something to their network, something that had severed the bonds holding their empire together. It was a stroke of genius and desperation that only a species facing extinction could have conceived. As reports flooded in from across the fleet of ships turning on each other, of crew members abandoning their posts, of the careful order of the Dominion dissolving into chaos, Voss realized that the war was over. Humanity had won not through superior firepower or advanced technology, but by giving their enemies back the one thing the Dominion had stolen from them: their freedom to choose. The species that had demanded humanity's submission were now discovering what it meant to kneel before a truly superior force. They were learning that sometimes the greatest victory comes not from conquest, but from liberation. The Great Hall of the United Nations building had never witnessed a scene quite like this one, where once Earth's leaders had gathered to debate humanity's surrender to alien conquerors. Now those same aliens knelt before human representatives, their proud heads bowed in desperate supplication. 2 years had passed since the quantum virus had shattered the Dominion's control network, and the galaxy had become a very different place. Commander Beth Hayes stood at the podium, her dress uniform bearing the insignia of the newly formed Terran Coalition Defense Force behind her. A massive display showed star maps marking the territories that had once belonged to the mighty Dominion Alliance. Red zones indicated areas now controlled by hostile forces that had emerged from the chaos of the Empire's collapse. Yellow zones marked regions where civil wars raged between former Dominion species. Only the small green zones around Earth and Its allied worlds showed any semblance of stability. Before her, arranged in a semicircle of specially designed chairs and platforms to accommodate their diverse biologies, sat the surviving leadership of what had once been the galaxy's dominant power. General Voss's compound eyes reflected the harsh lights of the assembly hall as he waited to hear humanity's response to their plea for assistance. Ambassador Thane's golden scales had lost their luster, dulled by months of desperate travel between worlds seeking help. Commander Zek's gills fluttered nervously as he contemplated the possibility of another rejection. They had come to Earth not as conquerors but as refugees, their mighty fleets reduced to a handful of ships fleeing from enemies they had once oppressed. The irony was not lost on anyone in the hall. The species that had demanded humanity's submission now found themselves begging for protection from the very people they had sought to enslave. Beth cleared her throat and began to speak, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced translation systems. 2 years ago, you came to our world with an ultimatum. You demanded that we surrender our freedom, our independence, and our right to determine our own destiny. You told us that resistance was futile and that our only choice was to kneel or die. The alien delegates shifted uncomfortably as she spoke, their various forms of body language betraying their shame and desperation. They knew what they had done, and they knew they had no right to ask for mercy from those they had wronged. Today, Beth continued, the situation is reversed. Your empire has collapsed, your worlds are under siege, and your people face extinction at the hands of forces you can no longer control. The hegemony grows stronger each day, absorbing your former territories and enslaving your populations with methods that make your old dominion look merciful by comparison. The hegemony was humanity's name for the new threat that had emerged from the galactic core after the Dominion's fall. Unlike the rigid hierarchy of the old empire, this new force was utterly ruthless, exterminating entire species rather than attempting to control them. They had already consumed a quarter of the galaxy, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing. You come to us now asking for help, Beth said, her tone remaining neutral despite the weight of the moment. You want our protection, our technology, and our guidance in fighting an enemy that threatens not just your survival, but the survival of all free peoples in this galaxy. The question before us today is simple. Why should we help you? Ambassador Thane rose slowly from his chair, his reptilian form seeming smaller and more fragile than it had during his first visit to Earth. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the imperious authority that had once made him the Dominion's most feared diplomat. Because, he said simply, we were wrong. Everything we believed about order, control, and civilization was built on a lie. We thought that freedom was chaos and that independence was weakness. We believed that only through submission to a higher authority could species achieve peace and prosperity. The humans have shown us the truth. He gestured toward the display showing the galactic situation. In the 2 years since our empire fell, only one region has remained stable and prosperous. Only one alliance has grown stronger rather than weaker in the face of this new threat. The Terran Coalition has achieved what the Dominion never could. True cooperation between independent species working toward common goals. Dr. Rivers, now serving as Earth's chief xenological advisor, stepped forward to add his perspective. The hegemony represents everything we fought against when we resisted your occupation. They see other species not as potential partners or even useful slaves, but as obstacles to be eliminated. They cannot be reasoned with, negotiated with, or reformed. They can only be stopped. The truth of his words was evident in the reports that had been flooding in from the galactic frontier. The hegemony's forces showed no interest in conquest or occupation. They simply sterilized every world they encountered, leaving behind empty systems ready for their own colonization. Already, over 200 species had been completely exterminated, their entire cultures wiped from existence. Emma Stone, now serving as the Coalition's chief military strategist, approached the podium to present the human response. The Terran Coalition has voted to accept your request for alliance, but not out of mercy or forgiveness. We do this because the threat you face is a threat to all free peoples, including ourselves. The hegemony will not stop with your territories. Eventually, they will come for Earth as well. A collective sigh of relief passed through the alien delegates as her words were translated. They had feared that humanity might choose to let their former oppressors face extinction alone, leaving Earth as the sole bastion of freedom in a galaxy consumed by tyranny. However, Emma continued, this alliance comes with conditions. You will not be restored to your former positions of authority. The days of the Dominion are over forever. Instead, you will join the coalition as equal partners, subject to the same laws and principles that govern all member species. The terms were harsh but fair. Each former Dominion species would be required to undergo a complete restructuring of their society, abandoning the hierarchical systems that had made their enslavement possible. They would have to learn to think independently, make their own decisions, and take responsibility for their actions. Most difficult of all, they would have to learn to work alongside species they had once considered inferior. General Voss spoke for the assembled delegates when he replied, "We accept your terms unconditionally. We have seen what our old ways brought us, and we have seen what your ways can achieve. We are ready to learn." The months that followed were among the most challenging in galactic history. The former Dominion species struggled to adapt to their new freedom, often making mistakes that would have been unthinkable under their old system. But they learned, slowly and painfully, what it meant to be truly alive rather than merely functional. The military integration proved especially difficult. Dominion forces had been trained to follow orders without question, making them nearly useless in the fluid tactical situations that characterized warfare against the hegemony. Human advisors worked tirelessly to retrain alien officers in the art of independent thinking and battlefield adaptation. Commander Tom Cross, who had survived his suicide mission to plant the original virus, found himself leading mixed units of humans and former Dominion species against hegemony advance forces. The early battles were disasters as the aliens struggled to break decades of conditioning, but gradually they began to understand the principles of flexible response and creative problem-solving that made human forces so effective. The first major victory came at the Battle of Kepler Station, where a combined force of human, Koran, and Mare ships successfully repelled a hegemony invasion fleet. The key to their success was not superior technology or overwhelming numbers, but their ability to adapt their tactics in real time as the battle developed. For the first time in their history, the former Dominion species experienced the exhilaration of victory achieved through their own efforts rather than predetermined programming. Dr. Rivers observed the changes in his alien colleagues with scientific fascination. "They're becoming more human," he noted in his reports to Earth. "Not physically, of course, but psychologically. They're developing individual personalities, personal ambitions, and even the capacity for humor. It's as if we're watching an entire civilization learn to be alive." The transformation was not limited to military affairs. Koran artists began creating works that expressed personal vision rather than collective ideology. Mare philosophers developed new schools of thought that celebrated individual achievement alongside social harmony. The crystalline Vex discovered that their natural ability to process multiple wavelengths of light made them exceptional at developing new forms of quantum communication technology. As the war against the hegemony intensified, these newfound abilities proved invaluable. The enemy's greatest strength was their predictability and coordination, but they had never faced opponents who could match their technological capabilities, while retaining the flexibility to adapt and improvise. The coalition forces, led by human strategists but powered by the diverse talents of a dozen species, began to push back the tide of conquest. The final confrontation came at the galactic core, where the hegemony had established their primary staging ground for the conquest of the outer regions. It was there that the true test of the coalition's unity would be faced, as they prepared to assault an enemy that had never known defeat. Ambassador Thane stood beside Emma Stone on the bridge of the coalition flagship as the massive combined fleet prepared for battle. "I want you to know," he said quietly, that regardless of what happens today, you have already given us something more valuable than victory. You have given us back our souls. Emma nodded, understanding the weight of his words. The war against the hegemony was important, but the greater victory had already been won. The species that had once demanded humanity's submission had learned something far more valuable than conquest. They had learned what it meant to be free. As the coalition fleet engaged the enemy, each ship fought not for an empire or an ideology, but for the right of all thinking beings to choose their own destiny. The species that had once knelt to the Dominion now stood as equals beside the humans who had taught them to stand. In the end, the greatest submission had been their surrender. Not to an alien power, but to the simple truth that freedom was worth any price.